This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israeli warplanes destroy a Hezbollah convoy in Lebanon. Could it lead to an escalation in the region? Plus, Palestinian-Jewish question, who has the right to the land of Israel? A new documentary looks for answers in the history of the Middle East. And the Bible calls Israel the land of milk and honey. We'll show you just how true that is. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from the Haas Promenade, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. Well, it's the oldest running conflict in the Middle East. Does Israel have a right to the land? Do the Palestinians? A new documentary tackles those questions and some misconceptions used to justify the case against Israel. Israel Indivisible, the case for the ancient homeland, highlights Israel's latest challenge.
The world media has joined the Islamic campaign to extinguish Jewish history as part of their effort to delegitimize and destroy the Jewish state.
The film lays out a compelling and comprehensive case for Israel's right to the land.
The evidence for Israel is overwhelming. From archaeological science to historical records to biblical scriptures to political resolutions and laws, there should be no dispute as to the rights of the Jewish people to all the land the Roman Empire called Palestine.
The producers chose to premiere the film in a symbolic site here in Ariel, the center of Israel's biblical heartland. At the Holy Land premiere, the film's producers presented the film's motive.
The goal is to educate Christians, to bring this message, because the message is being distorted and there's lies being propagated about Israel and this whole Middle East conflict. I feel like what we're doing at PJTN is just coming alongside, God's biblical narrative and telling a story that nobody seems to want to tell. And then, of course, using the film, using the program to mobilize Christians to action, to stand with our Jewish brethren.
Many Jews believe disinformation is one of the main weapons against the Jewish state.
The first step in, God forbid, the physical destruction of the state of Israel is the intellectual destruction, undermining the whole reason for being of the Jewish state, or the legitimacy.
The film unmasks some common misconceptions in this disinformation campaign, like the term West Bank.
Well, why is it called the West Bank? It's called the West Bank because when Jordan, basically in 1948, when they took it over, they called it the West Bank of their country, the West Bank of the Jordan River. They named it the West Bank. For centuries, and for, forever, it's been called Judea and Samaria.
Many see the film as a tool to give Israel supporters the facts they need in this battle.
And if they don't have the facts at hand, they become apologetic. The minute they become apologetic, they lose the argument. They need to be knowledgeable. Once they're knowledgeable, they'll be able to stand up for what's right.
Spiro sees information as the first line of defense, not only for Israel, but the West.
It's not only threatening Israel, it's threatening the whole foundation of Western civilization even. Movies like this that present information and facts are the most basic and powerful tool we have for not just the case for Israel, but for the case for truth.
Israel is constantly on guard to protect herself against her enemies. Recently, Israeli warplanes reportedly attacked a convoy inside Lebanon. Some reports say the convoy was carrying weapons to Hezbollah, including long-range missiles. At a press conference with visiting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would not confirm or deny the attack.
Our policy is clear. We will not speak about reports of what we did or didn't do, but we do all that is necessary in order to defend our citizens.
One of Israel's top naval commanders warns that Hezbollah continues to try to acquire strategic weapons in order to influence future battles. One of those targets could be the major oil and gas discoveries off Israel's coast. The Syrian border also continues to be a source of concern for the IDF. Israel's Chief of Staff General Benny Gantz announced on Sunday the Army was replacing one division on the border with one specially trained for the new situation. Gantz described the Middle East as explosive and said a storm is brewing underneath the seeming quiet night and day and on every front. He blamed Iran for most of that brewing storm and said there is no front where Iran is not involved, handing out torches to pyromaniacs with munitions and rockets, and has heavily involved itself in the fighting. He added the relative quiet along Israel's borders was misleading and vowed the IDF would be vigilant and prepared. He said when the state dials 911, the Army would answer. Gantz's statements and the reported strike are two more signs of how fragile the current situation is in the Middle East. The Syrian civil war is creating a new crisis in the Middle East. Failure to stop that intense fighting has led to a new wave of refugees fleeing that country. Their needs are overwhelming, and Christians are responding. Gary Lane has more from Iraq and Lebanon.
Another Syrian government barrel bomb explodes on rebel positions. Innocent civilians caught in the crossfire leave the country in droves. The crisis is perhaps the most severe since World War II, and no end appears in sight. According to the United Nations, more than 2 million Syrians are now registered refugees in neighboring countries. Most live in tent cities like this one, Kharagos Camp in northern Iraq. Fighting between Islamists and Kurdish militiamen forced this widow and her children to abandon their wheat farm. The UN has given them food and blankets, but she says she lacks money to buy fresh fruit and vegetables for her children.
And it's not just northern Iraq where refugees are pouring over the border each day. I'm in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Refugees are still coming in here. This camp is only 6 months old.
Many of the Syrians living in tents here have yet to register with the UN. So they're turning to Christian groups and others for help. Faiz arrived here from northeast Syria just days before we met him.
The militias were bombing and we were without electricity and water. Our city was surrounded by the Free Syria Army and Jabhat al-Nusra. They are kidnapping Christians. It's a very bad situation.
Faiz's family now lives with his brother Kamal's family, who arrived 6 months ago. A total of 13 people cramped in this small two-room apartment. Faiz feels safer in Lebanon, free from the militants destroying Syria's ancient Christian community.
They're trying to kick all the Christians out of the country. A Christian friend of mine was working construction, building a government school. They killed him and stole his truck. They don't have any compassion or mercy for us Christians.
But groups like CBN partner Heart for Lebanon are showing much compassion for the refugees. Those like young Mohammed. His family set up this small tent on farmland in southern Lebanon. The tent leaked when it rained, so a Heart for Lebanon worker convinced the property owner to let the family live in this shed. Mohammed stopped attending school more than 2 years ago, shortly after the Syrian civil war began.
He's a good boy, and he wants to go to the school. All 12 years old. He's 12 years old.
Pakistani education activist Malala Yousafzai tours a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. She and others worry Mohammed and his generation may lose any access to education. In 2012, a Taliban terrorist shot Malala as she returned home from school. She's now a global advocate for girls' education. But young refugees need more than education, food, and housing. Many, like 13-year-old Hamid, desperately need medical care. He was born without fully developed legs. Hamid endured a strenuous journey to Lebanon.
There's only one bone instead of two bones like the rest of us would have. You can see it doesn't attach correctly down here. That's not how the tibia would normally be on top of the talus. And you have the whole fibula is missing.
Not only did Heart for Lebanon provide Hamid with a comfortable mattress and food for his family, they also helped arrange leg surgery. Now, with more help, Hamid may eventually walk. They're also helping others with war injuries like 18-year-old Faraj. When we first met him last summer, Faraj needed his mother's help walking. Today, he's walking on his own. Faraj nearly died in Homs, Syria, when a rocket exploded in his living room, tossing him like a rag doll from a second-story balcony. The fall broke his arm, and hot shrapnel tore into his chest and back. He says he's doing much better now thanks to medical care and other help provided by CBN partner Heart for Lebanon. I asked if he would like to return to Syria to be a fighter. No, I wouldn't want to be a soldier, he says. He'd prefer to return to work in the clothing industry. Faraj wants Americans to pray for him.
Pray that God will heal me and that I will walk normally.
Perhaps one day, all the way from Lebanon, back to his Syrian home. From the Bekaa Valley, Gary Lane, CBN News.
Coming up, a new book by Jerusalem Post columnist Carolyn Glick exposes the failure of the two-state solution, offers a provocative alternative. Recently, I sat down with Carolyn Glick from the Jerusalem Post. Many people consider Glick one of the most insightful analysts in the Middle East, and she's written a new book called The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East. Here's that interview. You wrote a book, The Israeli Solution. Why did you write it?
I wrote it because I felt like it was time to just stop with the fiction that there's only one possible outcome of the Palestinian conflict with Israel, which is the establishment of a Palestinian state right in Israel's heartland. There is a better policy, and I feel like the time has come to start really discussing it and moving towards implementation.
And you call the two-state solution the beloved chimera of the Middle East. Why do you say that, and why is so many people focused on the two-state solution?
Well, it has been everybody's beloved chimera. It's this fantasy that everybody loves because all that it requires to work, as far as its purveyors are concerned, is for Israel to cough up sufficient territory to appease the Palestinians. You don't have to worry about the Arab world. You don't have to think about the intentions of the Palestinians or the larger Arab world towards Israel or towards the West. You can just say it's all Israel's fault, and all we have to do is concentrate on that, and everything will be great.
And why has it failed?
It failed because it doesn't pay attention to the real cause of the prolongation of the conflict, which is the Arab world's fundamental resistance to and opposition to the existence of the Jewish state. And until that changes in a fundamental way, there's nothing that Israel can do to appease them.
Do you think people are more interested in the peace process than they are in peace?
It's possible, because I think that, over the years, as it's become more and more obvious that the Palestinians really aren't interested in a Palestinian state per se, they're interested in destroying Israel, people start coming up with other things. They started telling us that Israel is demographically doomed, which was a lie, and now they're telling us that Israel is economically doomed, which is also untrue, if we don't establish a Palestinian state in our midst.
When I was looking through this book, I just saw so many things that would interest Christians and that have a love for Israel. Why do you think Christians should buy this book, read this book, study this book?
I think, Christians know through their faith in God and in the Bible that they are supposed to support and stand with Israel and the land of Israel. But, because of all of the disinformation and the misinformation and the sheer propaganda that's been put out through the past generation or two or three even about the nature of the conflict, about the nature of the Jewish state and the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel, most of the Christians that I've come into contact with over the years, and there have been many, they say, we stand with Israel because the Jews are God's chosen people, because Israel is the apple of God's eye, because we are told to in Genesis. But what this book shows is that command to stand with the Jews is based on good policy. It's sound strategic policy. And what this book does in chapter and verse is set out why this is the just policy, this is the moral policy, and this is the wise policy, not only for the United States, but of people of goodwill all over the world. So I think that this should be very important and very interesting to Christians, Christian Zionists, Christian non-Zionists who will probably become Christian Zionists after they read this. So I really look forward to having a discussion with Christians following their reading this book.
What impact do you hope this book will have?
I think that we've had this stale conversation about the Middle East and about the Palestinian conflict with Israel that's been going on and on and on, and just churning on and on for so many years. And the reason why it keeps going is because everybody's been told that there's no alternative to the two-state solution, which keeps failing over and over and over again, and will continue to fail for as long as it's pursued. But at the same time as it's being pursued, Israel will become weaker and weaker and weaker, which is why time isn't on Israel's side from that perspective. I think it's imperative for us to start a new conversation about what the options are for Israel, what the options are for America, and see the two-state plan as just one of many different options on the table. I personally believe, and I argue in my book, that the Israeli one-state plan, which involves sole Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank of the Jordan River, over Judea and Samaria, is the only viable option, which is what I argue in this book. Of course, I would love it if everybody agrees with me, but perhaps even more important than that is that people start thinking about it anew, and we start having a new conversation about the nature of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the nature of Israel's alliance with the United States, and why what we're doing and what we have been doing for the past generation just can't continue. I just hope that people are willing to listen to reason. I think it's long past due.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Up next, we'll take you to the land of milk and honey. Find out why Israel's agricultural boom is another sign of the times. The Bible calls Israel the land of milk and honey, and many people may be surprised to learn it's not just an expression. As Julie Stahl reports, it is literally true.
In the Bible, God promises the Jewish people a land flowing with milk and honey. And while it's a sign of abundance, it's also literal.
In fact, milk and honey is critical. It's used 20 times in Scripture.
But when the Jewish people returned from 2,000 years in exile, they found a barren desert land. And Orthodox Jewish author Moshe Kempinski says that was all in God's plan.
God says, I'm going to do something miraculous. I'm going to create a land that even though those climate issues don't call for it, it's going to be a land that's going to be filled also with dates and honey, and also with milk, so that you know that nothing comes here. Nothing in this land comes here except when it's from me.
And God has delivered on that promise. Despite the heat, humidity, and limited resources, the Israeli cow produces more milk per year than cows in the U.S., European Union, and Australia.
We keep going up.
Ronen Gal manages operations for the dairy at Kibbutz Yotvata, the largest milking facility of its kind in the country.
The milk production in Israel is very clever. It's very high-tech.
And what about the honey? Most believe honey in Bible times probably came from date trees. Botanist Dr. Elaine Salaway emigrated from the U.S. and settled not far from Yotvata on Kibbutz Keturah in 1974.
Actually, I started out here as the head of the orchard branch. And of course, that was kind of funny because at that time we didn't have any orchards. So in the first few years, I was responsible for planting them. And the first orchard I planted was the date orchard, which you can see behind us, which is the main agricultural branch of the kibbutz.
There are tens of thousands of acres of date trees in Israel. This date orchard is here at Kibbutz Keturah in the Arava Desert. Each one of these trees produces about 350 pounds of dates a year. Salaway even managed to sprout a 2,000-year-old date seed found by archaeologists years ago at Masada. Nicknamed Methuselah, the tree is now 5 years old. Dates and palms were important in the scriptures, and dates from this area were known throughout the ancient world.
The Romans had nothing nice to say about the Jews, except that they had good dates.
Today, Israel's dates are still famous throughout the world. Israel exports some 12,000 tons of dates each year to 20 countries. Now, Salaway is going beyond dates to grow other life in the desert.
I'm looking for trees that love to live in the desert, that rejoice to live in the desert, not the ones I have to keep on life support.
She found clues in the Bible.
Well, the biblical trees, if they grew here in the old days, why shouldn't they grow here now? We reintroduced frankincense and myrrh, which had probably been introduced at the time of King Solomon. According to what we can tell from folk tales and from the Bible, there was already an incense and a medicinal tree being cultivated here called the balm of Gilead.
The frankincense and myrrh brought to Jesus were probably in crystal form like this. According to Kempinski, the revival of trees in the land is the first sign of redemption.
Ezekiel 36 says, "Mountains, shoot forth your branches, give forth your fruit, because my children are coming home." That's an unusual thing for God to tell a tree. That's what he created a tree to do. Except God is saying in Leviticus, I said it's going to be a desolate land when I kick you out. But watch, When I bring my people back home, this land is going to come forth with blossoms and trees and fruits.
So, he says, every date you eat and every glass of milk you drink here is like prophecy being fulfilled. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Kibbutz Keturah, Israel.
Coming up, a Palestinian girl faces a catastrophic disease, finds help from an unexpected source. Finally this week, most 13-year-old girls are consumed with boys, clothes, and friends. But the teenager you're about to meet was concerned about something far more serious. Here's her story.
Dania led a normal life, growing up in a Muslim village in the West Bank. Then when she was 13 years old, she developed a problem with her eyes. Her mother didn't know what was wrong.
One day after school, I was talking to Dania's teacher. She said her eyesight was bad and suggested I take her to the doctor. The doctor said that she was almost blind.
Dania had keratoconus, a degenerative disorder that affects the shape of the cornea.
The other children would call me names, like dummy, and make fun of me. They used to treat me very badly, but I pretended like I didn't care.
Her close friends and neighbors still accepted her, but now things were different. Dania stayed home as much as she could, but her eyesight was so bad, she couldn't even help her mother around the house.
I was afraid I would have to stay at home and live the life of a blind woman. I was so worried for my daughter, because I knew that she would have a hard life, and no one would take care of her after we were gone.
There was no way the family could afford the cornea transplants she needed to see. So when Operation Blessing heard about Dania, we paid for her eye surgeries.
Now I can see everything far away and close up. Other kids don't make fun of me anymore. Now I can help around the house. I want to thank you for helping my daughter, and I want to encourage people to support the work you do. Without you, I would not be able to see. I'm very happy. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about the work of Operation Blessing Israel, you can check out their webpage. You can find a link to that on our Jerusalem Dateline page at cbnnews.com. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time right here in Jerusalem.